Well, here we are, and you might notice some things that are different. That's because we're going to be moving on today. Um, it's been a whole year, plus one, I think, where it took us to get through the training of the 12, published in 1870. Done. I hope you watch that. New playlist starting today that's going to work on something different. But before I get there, I want to talk to you about the macro plan, the breakthrough pathways. That's the name of this channel. I've been working with my colleague and personal friend, Richard Fleming. Let's see his name there. He's really a lot of the guts and the stimulus behind this. Richard's more the man who's out front, more in secular terms, you'd call him the promoter, the salesman. And I don't really like those terms because sometimes people think of that promoter or salesperson as trying to sell you for $1 something that's only worth 50 cents. And what we've got going on here in the Breakthrough Pathways is we're trying to give away to you on a pay it forward donation basis something that's worth $1 million, not $500,000 and maybe even $2 million. I am totally and absolutely convinced. And as we move forward during this year, I believe that we're going to uncover for you some things that will make you think very, very differently about church life and about what has been going on. We kind of have a mental map of what we think things should be. And our mental map by default is made up of what our past experience has been. And I'm fond of saying, if you do what you always have done, you'll get what you always got. What we've been getting, as I've been pointing out to you for quite some time, is that we're not getting the results that we're supposed to be getting and reaching the world for Jesus. And in particular, starting from our Jerusalem and Judea and going to Samaria to the other parts of the earth. We're not doing as well at it. And someone will say, yes, but what about that incident over there? And what about that country over there? And what about this church over here? And they have in their mental map an idea of what success is. Our problem is that while many people will say, we need new models, and they'll start pounding on the table and saying, we got to do something different, with which I totally agree. Then I say to those people, well, tell me about your model. And they say, well, that's for somebody else to figure out. Well, honestly, Richard and I have figured something out. We haven't completely tested it yet out in the field, but we've got a combined experience, and it's kind of scary to say, of about a century at figuring out how not to do it. And we've learned some ways, he internationally, on it's really on 3 continents now, me just on 1 continent, well, 2 continents, a bit in Asia, but mostly in North America. We're looking at things that are different than what other people are looking at. Breakthrough Pathways, this book, this anchor book, is just one of many that will be coming out, will help us understand what we've been doing wrong, we believe, and how we can make it right. And I like my way of doing it, some people's way of not doing it, and just staying where they are and being afraid to change. Sometimes it's difficult to move. And I really very much believe that the guys who try to move a church by a revolution and say, all bets are off, here we go, we're going to do it a new way, it doesn't work out. I know of one church that sold their church building and bought a trailer and a trailer full of goodies, the LED lights, the smoke machine, the stellar sound system and everything else. And they were going to a new location and the world was going to beat a path through their door. That church subsequently shut down, and that man has left the country and found a new ministry elsewhere. It was deeply sincere, the man who was leading it, but it was also deeply flawed because it isn't about anything other than what it takes to make a difference. You might have noticed in the footer here today, I misspelled the word witness. No, I didn't. I put a niche in there because I believe withness is really the issue. And so we're going to drill into this today and get started. Now, Jesus said just before he went into heaven, you're going to be my witnesses. And martyrion, I think is how you say the word, which really from which we get the word martyr. And the idea is it's going to be tough and it's going to be difficult, but it's going to be effective, deeply effective. And in that first century, it was deeply effective. Back in 1963, a professor, Dr. Coleman, wrote this book, The Master Plan of Evangelism. On the title, if you read the small print, it says over 3.4 million copies sold. It's still selling today, over 4 million copies in over 100 languages, and is one of the anchor pieces that we're going to be working on going forward over the next quarter at least. And I'm going to jump off of what Coleman has said, and I won't always be quoting him directly, but he has seeped into my soul in what he said. But my sense of it is I read Coleman's work, while it's deeply profound, I don't think it goes far enough so that we can understand the world in which we find ourselves right now. And I want to share with you some things that I want you to mull over. And I hope that you will, and I'd not just mull them over, but say, okay, that's pointing in the direction of a new model. So let me see if I can design a new model and see if I can kind of run it up the flagpole and see if anybody salutes at this new flag. We need newness. Now, when you're working in an existing context, in an existing church, you can only work with evolution, with revolution, unless the church votes for a revolution. A denominational leader from our particular denominational nation, he would go into a church in crisis and he would help them only if they would take a congregational vote and vote themselves as a church in crisis. Did it make any difference? Well, yeah, it did. Because they had to admit, first and foremost, that what they've been doing has not been working. And sometimes we have consultants go into churches and say, okay, you need to fix this, you need to fix that, and everything else. And I say it's kind of like seagull management. Is they fly in, they make a lot of noise, they crap all over everybody, and then they just fly away. And the people are left without a model and a leader to follow. I believe that we've created for you, or in the process of creating for you, some of the things that will go beyond your wildest imagination, that will help you. And if they cannot help you in terms of resources, we will, as Lord willing and funding available, basically, we will have people who can come alongside you, not come in for a weekend consultation or come in and say, disband your constitution, start all over again, but that will actually hold your hand with you in the saddle where you are now. But in order to change, you actually have to change. And that might get uncomfortable. When I'm meeting with people, I ask them to fold their arms. And then I say, now fold them the other way. And they kind of go like this. And now, is there anything wrong with folding your arms this way or folding your arms this way? I don't know, but it's really hard for me to switch because I do it with other people. But do you realize that when you go to brush your teeth, you are a person of habit. Hope you brush your teeth. You stick the toothbrush in one side of your mouth every time. Do you realize that if you're like me and you shave your head, there's a little bit of hair left up here. Not really. This would grow over here. But I shave my head regularly on Sunday mornings or Saturday night. And I have a little clipper thing. And I always start over here. And I laugh at myself. I too am a creature of habit, just like all of us are. But if it made a difference as to whether you started here or started here, and this was better, if it were, it's not, then I would have to learn how to say, no, don't do this, do that. But I'll only change if I believe that the change is important and valuable going forward. I believe if you're a pastor and you're in a local church, first of all, I believe that 85% of you are on a plateau or in decline. And the word I like to use is you're languishing. And you need to change your tack. You need to pivot to a new approach. And we're going to discuss exactly how to do that as we go forward. You can tell I'm excited about this. I really am, because I believe we've got some things to say here that will actually change more churches than you could ever imagine. But I'm also realistic that it won't happen on a broad basis. Well, it may if it takes hold, because sociologically it takes hold, or spiritually the Spirit of God says, hey, over there. And perhaps I serve a bit of a John the Baptist role. I'm getting too old to see this come to much fruition. I have a few people, only a few, who are with me on this, who are working to make it move forward. See, the people around you, first of all, we got to think about what's happening in our own silo, where we are in our denomination, our church, the people that we presently associate with. And, all those people, if I'm right, and I am right, statistically speaking, just heard Ryan Burke, a great guy on the stats of things. There was, a year ago, there was a few news articles that says, oh, young people are coming back to church, it's changing everything. And he said, the stats don't show that. And I heard him in a podcast just yesterday, and somebody said, hey, were you wrong? Is there anything? He said, no, the stats don't show that. There is no revival happening. There can be. I would argue that young people are much more open than older people. Therefore, it's highly likely that the people you need to work with are people who are younger. But the situation is this, and this is true in the society, that's one side of things, and in the church, and that's another side of things. In terms of the church, they're oblivious. They do not know that the church is in decline, and they think that when I say so, I've just been, a negative, nervous Nelly, as one of our prime ministers once said. That's not true. It is, and there are some happy places, and I can thankfully say that the denominations with which I participate, two of them in two Baptist denominations, directly and indirectly, there are some signs that some good things are happening, but within that, there also are some signs that things are not as good as they should be. And people don't like it when you say, well, it could be better. I understand that. I don't like to be called out myself. We're all the same way. But this is what I know for sure, is that the first rule of leadership is to define reality. And our reality is not right. That mental map that we've developed is not consistent with what we claim it to be. Master plan. The master plan. So that's what we're going to be talking about. The master plan as developed by the master. See, people start off oblivious. They don't know there's a problem. They don't know there's a solution. And if you can get their attention, and we'll talk a little bit about what that takes as well, you can get them to think about it. They're not going to jump in and buy immediately. That's a great fallacy. One seminar, one workshop at a convention, and they go home and say, oh, I'm so going to do this. And they get home and leaves. Yeah, you think so? Oh, I'm so discouraged. I came up with the whole thing. Look, folks, it's not going to be adopted immediately. You've had Kentucky Fried Chicken, right? Did you know that Colonel Sanders approached a number of restaurants before he could get anybody to take on the first franchise to take his chicken recipe? Could you guess how many restaurants he had to approach? 5, 10, 15, 20, 1,009 at age 65. He sometimes slept in the back seat of his car because he believed in his recipe. Well, I'm not at 1,009 yet, but I'm not counting that in that disciplined way. And I've never slept in the back seat of my car. But I'm passionate about it, giving all that I've got to help you understand. And if you take pieces of this and put it into play, that's great. But I know one piece that needs to happen is you need to pass it on. If this is a value, you need to pass it on. Hit the subscribe button, pass it on to somebody else. This is worth it. And that's all we need, is something that's worth it. You've got to be, as I've facetiously said, put on my tombstone, at least he tried. I actually don't want that. I want a different Bible verse. It's a story for another day. I know where I'm going to be buried. Well, if the Lord doesn't come back, it's about a kilometer from here. I'm Canadian, so we're speaking kilometers and not in miles. It's in an old graveyard that was established way back in the pioneer days, because we live in a very old house, and because we live in this pioneer village, we were able to purchase in that graveyard. So you just got to dig the hole and drop me in it. I'm good to go. I'm good to go any day. But I so much want to live to 120 until I can see the results of what we're talking about. See, I'm not thinking about it. I'm at the next level, oblivious, ponder, engaged. I'm deeply engaged because I understand the fourth level need. Some people can be engaged and say, well, they should change over there. Maybe you should go and do that. Like you get on the bus. This is recognizing this is a personal need, a need for you, for me to change and let the Holy Spirit change us so that we develop a system that, as Paul said, presents everybody as a mature believer in Christ. Now, I've never seen that happen. There have been times in history, and if you look up some of the work of J. Edwin Orr, you'll be amazed at it, as to what God has done in unusual ways in times of revival. But that's not the normal plan. The normal plan is that we actually make Jesus Lord, acknowledging that he's Christ, as Peter recognized in his sermon in Acts chapter 2. He is first Lord. He's the boss. And so we're going to look at how we move people from oblivious through to ponder. And it may take some time to ponder. We're going to talk about how long it took Jesus to get people to ponder. Imagine that. The sinless, perfect Son of God, the best specimen of humanity that was ever seen on the planet Earth. And it took him a while to get people to even ponder and to get engaged in to see their need and to take it forward. See, the plan in our world always has 4 stages to it. The first stage is presence. We got to be there. And I will argue that most pastors are wearing out their office chair much more than they're wearing out their soles of their shoes. They're not demonstrating presence out there. They're putting the sign out in front or getting the nice new fancy digital sign out in front that says, all welcome. But they're not getting out there to talk to people. I have a friend who was preaching in a different church, a church that was kind of down and out, and he got there earlier than the person who locked the door. So he went and talked. He talked to a bunch of people on the street and basically said, come to church. And he talked to, I don't know, a couple of dozen people, and 3 of them showed up. I wasn't there. I can't verify exactly what the conversation was, but I know that you have to have a presence with people. And if you're working in a local church, you've got to get outside of the silo and find somewhere to get engaged where there's a large enough group of people that you can make a difference with. Some guys say, yeah, I blend my recreation with that. And there you 20 guys in a dressing room are not there wanting to change. They want to play hockey. And I'm not against you doing that. Being on the local baseball team and making a few friends, because a few friends will lead you to a few friends. I'm not against it. But you need to find a place with a bigger pond of people who are looking for change in their life. Now, typically, what they're looking for in many of these events is something for themselves, and they are not there to help the other guy. But you can go in there and be present to help people with whatever they do. And there are many ways that you could figure this out. A parent-teacher association in a church, in a school, a situation with maybe a businessman's association or a service club in the area. Often they have monthly, sometimes even weekly meetings that you can attend and become involved in a pond of people where you can say to them, what's the biggest challenge you're facing in your business, your school, these days? And take notes, mental notes, maybe even physical notes on your phone afterwards. Don't take notes while you're there. That'll make them too self-conscious. But make a mental note of the thing. And then you can go back to the organizer and say, I've done some informal research with the people here, and I found that the number one thing that they think they're having trouble with is such and such. I have some things to say about that. Would you be interested in learning about that? And perhaps maybe I could speak to the group for 10 minutes. And that 10 minutes could easily turn into an hour. You got to get out there where they are. And that means you've got to be prospecting within whatever pond you find that's useful in your community. Get out there and do some prospecting and talk to people. And prospecting doesn't mean putting your foot on their throat and saying, you got to buy my thing or pay attention to me. No, it just means finding where the itch is that you can scratch, finding where somebody is willing to ponder the new way that you're talking about. We've spent far too much time, in my view, out on the streets going through an evangelistic program like, back in my day, it was, have you heard of the 4 spiritual laws? And today, the cool thing is, have you heard of the 3 circle presentation? I make it 4 circles, and I use it as an outline, and I know and understand and believe in the 4 spiritual laws, but that's not at the prospecting level. You've got to have people who get to believe in you. They get to know you. They get to like you and trust you. And if you go in as the authority and say, well, you need to trust Jesus, you're going to find a few, but you'll find very, very few. That was methodology that worked back in the day when people had kind of a residual Christianity in their mind. But they don't drive by churches and say, oh, I really should get back to church, any more than you drive by a Masonic temple and say, oh, maybe I should go and join them there. You don't know what the Masons are all about. I'm not recommending them. They're not paying attention. They're not aware. You got to do the prospecting to find the people that have a niche that you can scratch. And then you need to, at that point, and only at that point, get into the place where you share what your real answers are. Maybe you do some presentation of some other things first, where you demonstrate, whatever it is that whatever, fitness, nutrition, whatever your field is that's non-religious. But you have to be, in your presentation, contagious, so that they say, wow, that person really is a nice person. I was so engaged, it was like I got into a vortex where they just kind of sucked me in. They paid attention to me. When I talked to them the second time, they remembered that I told them about the problem I was having and came back and asked me about it, because they really showed an interest in me. They really demonstrate that they cared. And that presentation can happen over time. And then in due course, when they start nodding their head and saying, you can start to enter into persuasion and say, is that something you want to hear more about? Maybe someday you can be interested in what I've been saying here. And they say, well, not really. Say, well, just thought I should make sure that you know that I'm available for you. Keep moving on. Keep prospecting. Don't say, I'm no good at this. Nobody's any good at it. It's not about how good you are at it. It's about where the other person is. You got to find the person who wants what you have to offer. That's the plan. And you're going to see that Jesus had that plan. Jesus' results, he fed the 5,000 plus. I'll tell you that's 15,000. Don't know exactly. We know that Paul said in Coleman, I first reference to Coleman right in his book, he believes that there wasn't many more than 500 converts of any kind, but they were the 500 that Paul recognizes in his epistles that Jesus appeared to after the resurrection. We know that of those 500 of them, 120, including Mary and some other women, also including the 11, because Judas is gone by now. They're in Acts chapter 1 in the room. But we know that Jesus also spent time with the 12, a lot of time with the 12, a lot of walk and talk. And with the 12, he actually invested more in the 3, Peter, James, and John. And so what we've got to understand, if we're going to be like Jesus, is where do we distribute our resources, our time, our talent, and our treasure? Where do we put the money? I'm not against you. investing in church buildings. Been there and helped build some church buildings over the day. I'm not interested, not against you. I mean, the best sound system that you can have and a better video camera than you've got to record things. What this is just a $40 camera I got off a team. It's no big deal. I could have it, and some people will advocate, well, you got to have a top-class microphone. This microphone, I got to run a wire here. Sometimes I use a wireless one. It costs less than $20. It's no big deal. I can get the message to people who want to listen. Is it professional? Well, no. I'm actually using free software called Open Broadcasting System. I tell you right now, it takes a little bit of work to get to learn how to use it, and I'm getting better at it as I go along. And you can too. You don't, spending more money on the glass windows in your new church building isn't going to achieve what Jesus achieved. Coleman in his book, don't have it handy here. His first line was, men were his method. Men were his method. That's his premise. Now, I suspect that he overstates a little bit how much time Jesus actually spent with men according to the New Testament and how much he spent with groups. Cursory study, which is approximate because you've got to kind of draw together Matthew, Mark, and Luke because they're the synoptics and they overlap some. So is this incident actually that is an incident? Was there another incident? There's some ambiguity there. And John, who doesn't, generally speaking, say anything much that Matthew, Mark, and Luke did, but of what they've recorded for us, and this is not prescriptive. Some things are prescriptive, but this is a category of information. It's not prescriptive. It's descriptive of what we know of the life of Jesus. Now, we do know that there are incidents where it says he traveled from town to town, and we don't know what he did in this town, that town, and the other town. So we don't have a complete record, but we have everything that we need. John tells us in his gospel that, look, well, he had the other records. Quite probably he had them in his hand by the time he wrote. He said the world couldn't contain all the books, but we can learn enough from the description of what Jesus did to understand what was valuable to him. And we have in the Bible, and this is what Holman emphasizes, about 70 incidents where Jesus deals with individuals. We have about 50 incidents that are small groupish, the disciples, or maybe a group in a house, and so on. And then large crowd encounters of roughly 70 incidents. Now, I think that's instructive. Jesus, as Coleman points out in his very first paragraph, worked on the men. He didn't work primarily on, the programming and getting the event planner to make the big things happen. So we've got to, if we're going to be like Jesus, we've got to have a balance in where we invest our time, our talent, and our treasure. And if you have a position where you have a lot of time that you serve the Lord, maybe full-time or part-time in ministry, at least spread it equally amongst these things. If you're not spending time with individuals, and we're going to talk about how to spend time with the right individuals, we won't get to it today. I can see the time's flying by. But we will get to it, how to pick who you're going to invest time with. You got to be careful. Let me point out that while John starts with the beginning of the gospel and a micro plan that is going to the pond where people who had a niche they wanted to scratch, these were the people that went all the way across the Jordan into the wilderness to hear John the Baptist. That tells us that they had a niche that they wanted to have scratched, and Jesus attended that event. And how many people did he get? All of Jerusalem, it says, went out to see him. It's everybody. It's not really everybody. How many did Jesus pull away from that event? Go read the first chapter of the Gospel of John, and you'll learn that. I guess we'll probably come back to that at another time. As we move forward, I'm going to suggest to you that in a local church, if we look at this the pyramid, I guess there's no point in me having the camera on, or since it's behind me here. We start with the general church attenders, the people who come. And when I ask people, how big's your church? And they say 150, I say, no, that's not how big your church is. That's what your typical attendance is, but people are not there. They're there maybe 1 out of 2 Sundays. The stats will say 1 out of 3. And good luck with actually discipling and changing people for your sermons if they're only there 1 out of 3. But you've got the general church attenders, and you got your 100 people, or if you're average, 60 people, a little less than 60 now, the typical attendance. But that's not how many people are in your church. You've got double that many. If you go to your church directory and it's up to date, then you have, roughly speaking, twice as many people in your church as you see at any given Sunday. But we have the wrong mental map. If I say, how big's your church? You'll tell me what the attendance is. Probably on Easter Sunday is what you'll tell me. Not on your worst Sunday in the summer when everybody's away on vacation or on a snow day or something like that. And then you've got to get participants in something else. And we're going to move you up the ladder and give you resources at every level moving forward. So you got to stay with us in the future podcast. It's so important that you do so. And you can get a hold of Breakthrough Pathways book. Actually, this one has 1 chapter missing that I've got to add to it. I haven't got it done yet. We're going to give you a plan that will help you in a way that's never been concocted before, not to my knowledge. Some will make reference to it, but never with an organized plan. Richard is kind of the front man on this. And he does some of the video work. I do the mix and match stuff for getting people to participate and getting them to stick their toe in the shallow end of the pool. Remember I said they start off oblivious? Most of the people in your church think church is something that happens on Sunday morning, and they think that 60 people is what we have in our church, and they don't know that you know. You know, if you didn't know before, you got 120 people or whatever it is in your church. And you're responsible for all of them because Paul says you want to present all of them as complete in Christ. They're oblivious to that. You've got to get them to ponder that what we've been doing is inefficient, ineffective. It is not working the way it should. And when people say, oh, you should be visiting Matilda in the hospital and maybe she'll come to church. Well, somebody should be visiting Aunt Matilda in the hospital. And maybe she'll come to church. But it's not your job if you're a church leader. It's your job to make sure that the jobs get done. People say, well, I don't know what you do with visiting Matilda in the hospital. Then you say, well, I'll go with you for the first time. And so you go with her and you can say, this is so-and-so. And she says, oh, well, it's so nice to meet you and so on. And then when you get back in the car and you go away, the person says, well, that was a slice of life. I don't know what that's about. Move on, find somebody else and say, I never realized Aunt Matilda was in the hospital, and that was so fulfilling for me to be there. Could I go back and visit her again? We're going to move people. We're going to help you move people through that process going forward, getting them off the back bench. You can't do it by just putting out an announcement and standing up on the pulpit and saying, all of you should be involved in our small group ministry. And if you're not involved in the small group ministry, you meet me at the back of the church and I'll get you linked up with one. It's your job to be the initiator, to go and make a presentation. And if they say no, they say no. Don't drive them away. I win them slowly and slowly and slowly. It took, from what John says in the beginning of the Gospels, his first encounter with Andrew and John, to when Jesus, Mark and Luke recorded, goes by the Sea in Galilee and it says, follow me. I believe that's a 6-month time frame. What was Jesus doing in that time? He was hanging around observing people, looking for the people who had a level of responsiveness. We're going to talk about that responsiveness, the characteristics of the people he chose. It took maybe 6 months. It took maybe Coleman's theory, I've always said it was a year, and I don't know how they could figure it out really. Coleman says it was about a year and a half before he actually formalized the choosing of the 12. This doesn't happen overnight. You got to give it a couple of years. And if you're thinking of quitting, this is the worst time possible to quit. What if Colonel Sanders had knocked on 1,001 doors? You never would have had that nice chicken. Maybe it's not your favorite. It's my favorite. Chick-fil-A. Yeah, it's okay. I like KFC, but I'm old. What if he'd have quit at 1,008? He knocked on 1,009 doors because he believed in what he was doing. If you'll do that for a little common piece of fried chicken that's got too much fat on it and the batter and everything else, it might taste good, but it may not be as good for you as it is in tasting. If you'll invest in that, why can't you invest in knocking on one more door, finding someone who may be open to work with you and move forward? We're going to talk exactly how to do that as we go forward. But I think I better quit for today. And I hope that you will start by passing on the news and letting someone else know that we're into a whole new thing and this is going to be different. You've never heard this before. You've never seen it before, unless somebody else is doing exactly the same creative work that I'm doing, and I don't think they are. Hope that this has been a blessing to you and that it will challenge you to start really thinking about how to reformat how you're conducting your life and ministry for Jesus. Because souls depend on it. There are only two kinds of people, the lost and the saved. And it's your job and mine to do everything we can to win the lost.